But today we have Fiona Davis. She's a New York Times best-selling author of 7 historical fiction novels set in iconic New York City buildings, including The Spectacular, The Magnolia Palace, The Address, and The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which was a Good Morning America book club pick. Her articles have appeared in publications like the Wall Street Journal and the Oprah magazine. She first came to New York as an actress, but fell in love with writing after getting a master's degree in Columbia's journalism school. Her books have been translated into over 20 languages, and she's based in New York City. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I see some familiar faces. So thank you, everybody, for coming up.
And so I have so many questions today. Although I did also, because you did say right now, so far, all of your novels have been based in New York, but you do have a new one. And I want to talk about that one a little bit later, because that one you said was not based, that was based in Egypt. But to get started, everyone does have a diagnosis story. Would you mind sharing yours with us?
Yeah, sure. In 2020, we were all in lockdown, if you remember, and I had a book coming out called The Lions of Fifth Avenue, and it was coming out in August that year. And right around kind of June, July, I noticed when I held my phone, my hand moved back and forth. And, I didn't really think anything of it because we weren't out in public. And, I thought it would stress from having a book come out. And then what happened was the book came out, and then I was walking through the park at some point, and I got a call, and it was my editor and my agent, and they called me to say, your book hit the New York Times bestseller list. And it was just so, it was the first time it happened. It was really exciting. I was over the moon. And then the very next day, I went to a movement disorder specialist, because my doctor had said, okay, let's just send you here and make sure it's, not something serious. And they had me do all the tests. I did everything. I passed with flying colors. I thought this was great. And she sat me down and she said, okay, you have Parkinson's. And that was the day after. So it was quite the roller coaster of, okay, now I have something brand new to have to focus on here. And it was quite a shock. I was 53.
Mhm.
And I thought, I'm so young. And then I learned later that, of course, no, a lot of people are diagnosed in their 50s. That's not uncommon at all.
Mhm.
And at that point, what I did was I really threw myself into the research, almost as I do when I write books, where I started interviewing people and looking up studies, and I did too much that early, where
Okay.
I didn't realize back then that we all have our own particular journey when it comes to Parkinson's. There's so many different symptoms. You can't compare one to the other. And so if I was calling up people in their early 80s, it wasn't helpful because it was a different kind of Parkinson's in a way. Um, and at that point, I started reaching out to people who, were kind of more my age group, and found a wonderful support group,
Mhm.
of wonderful women. In fact, a number of us just had dinner in the city last week, which was great. And that's wonderful because they're people who I can, you can reach out to and ask questions, and there's no dumb questions. And when we do a Zoom, if you're having a symptom that's annoying, you can kind of crowdsource it. And so it's been a real gift in terms of meeting these women who I otherwise would have never have met.
That would be quite though the juxtaposition that you were just on top of the world, and then you're like, oh, now I have this
Yeah,
other
like
one.
smack.
How did that impact you though? So now you have this diagnosis, but did it impact you or anything? What changes have you had to make to be able
I'm lucky in that my symptoms are pretty mild. And so it was right now I have a tremor in my right arm and my right leg. I have some other symptoms. My smell comes and goes, which is interesting. Like every so often I'll smell grass, and I'll say to my boyfriend, oh my God, do you smell the grass? It's amazing. And then it kind of disappears again. And I have sleep issues of yelling in my sleep and that kind of thing. But for about a year, I didn't go on levodopa, and then I did, and that kind of erased everything. And so for a couple years, it was that honeymoon period of, oh, it's probably not even Parkinson's. I'll just go about my life. And then the symptoms started coming back, and now My right foot is starting to curl up when I walk as the meds wear off. And so I'm having to deal with that of, okay, when can I drive? When should I not drive? And just starting to make adjustments. And, it's tough because I feel like I could spend my time worrying about what's going to happen. What happens if I can't drive? What happens if I lose independence? You have these fears about what's going to happen in the future. And it helps to me to have something creative to work on because it puts me in another world in a way, in a world where Parkinson's kind of doesn't intrude and I can, lose myself in that. And I think that helps a lot. And then on top of that, I feel like I'm part of the patient council at Michael J. Fox Foundation.
Mhm.
And there, you see all these things that are in the pipeline and these wonderful drugs and ideas that are coming up that I feel like, okay, I could really freak out about everything and spend a lot of energy doing that. And then in 7 years, they find something that, slows the progression or fixes a symptom that I'm having, or even finding a cure. And I'll have wasted those 7 years of worrying about something that never happened.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to pull back and be grateful, every time I'm walking down the street to my building, I'm here in New York City. I I often think, okay, here you are, you're walking to your building. All right. And it just feels like, take hold of that because at one point you may not be able to. And
Mhm.
so by kind of, sorry,
No,
by
I.
kind of living in the moment,
Mhm.
it helps to be positive, be grateful, and just keep on moving forward.
Mhm.
It took me, what, 2 minutes to cry? I mean, come on.
No, but it's real though what you're dealing with and how it can impact you. And Sheila from Tucson is sending you a hug.
Oh, thank you, Sheila.
It's real, and I do also think Parkinson's people have said it's kind of that roller coaster, and
Yeah.
so you
Yeah,
kind of got
for sure. Absolutely.
now. I do want to also talk a little bit about, because you do write incredible historical fiction. How do you do your research? Because we can talk all the time about Parkinson's, but you're so much more than everyone is more than they're just their Parkinson's. It's something you have. It's not who you are. And so you are a very talented writer. So I would love to talk a little bit more about, because all your books have been historical fiction. What inspired you? I mean, I assume you're a native New Yorker because so far they've all been set in New York, but oh no. Okay, tell me.
No, no, no. Yeah, it was kind of a long journey. In fact, I didn't write my first book. I didn't get my first book published till I was 49. So I always tell people, it's never too late. And I don't think I could have written these books when I was younger because I didn't have the experiences under my belt
Mhm.
in a way, to be able to access what the character was thinking and doing. And so my parents both English, and I was born in Canada, but raised in New Jersey and Utah, which are two really weird places to go back and forth from. And I ended up going to the College of William and Mary in Virginia. And after that, I came to New York to be an actress, actually. And I worked on Broadway and off Broadway and in regional theater, soap operas, all that good stuff back in the 90s. And it was a lot of fun. And some of my best friends today are from that time. And in fact, my book, The Chelsea Girls, is about two women putting a play on Broadway. And that's very much drawn from my experiences working with a theater company. And so after that, though, as I got older, I realized that it's much harder as an ingenue to age in that business. And I was not going to put up with that. And so I actually, I didn't know what to do. So I went down to NYU Career Services Building. And this was before the internet. And I took a Myers-Briggs test because apparently that would tell me what I should be. And I took this test. And then I went back the next day and they said, okay, we've done the test and you should either be a journalist or a policeman. And I thought, okay, well, that's easy. And so I applied to Columbia Journalism School and I got in, and that's where I started writing, but it was nonfiction. And it was a wonderful grounding. It was really an incredible place to learn how to write. And after that, I worked for our local Channel 13 here. I interned for a magazine. I wrote for a theater magazine and then started freelancing. So I was writing, 700 word pieces on heartburn for Women's Health or, Oprah magazine. And it was a lot of fun. And then at one point, I found a story that I thought would be a great article, but I couldn't do it as an article because the people involved were not interested in being interviewed. And I simply couldn't shake it. And I started thinking this would be a great book. And what if there were two timelines? And would be set at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, both back in the 50s and then later in modern times. And I just couldn't shake it. And I just thought, let me throw that out as a challenge. Let me see if I can possibly write a book. I had never imagined I could before. And I just I took workshops, I read books on writing, and I crafted a manuscript. And at that point, I reached out to an agent who I'd heard talk. I started going to writers' conferences to see what the fiction world of writing was all about. And I heard this wonderful agent speak, and I sent it to her, and she was lovely. And she said, it needs a lot of work, which it definitely did as a first book. But, I really like it. I love the idea of it. And I have a great title because at that point I had no title for it. And she said, but I'm not going to tell you the title unless you sign with me. And so I signed with her and we've been together ever since. She's amazing. And, one of the first people who reads each manuscript as they come along. And so it was this kind of weird path. And I really, like I said, I didn't publish that book until I was 49. And so suddenly I was off on this whole new direction of writing historical fiction that I absolutely did not expect. And so I always recommend that you should change your career every 10 years. And then eventually you find something you really love.
And David asked, does journaling play a role in your writing?
Journaling?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. No, I do not journal. And there's something about I hate wasted words. I'm the daughter of engineers, and so when I write my books, they're very carefully crafted. I figure out the characters, I figure out what's going to happen. I outline it very carefully so I know kind of what has to happen in each chapter, and that's really important, especially for two timelines with an element of mystery because I want people to be turning the pages. I want them to want to know what's going to happen. So there's that tension. And weaving two timelines together without giving away too much in one or the other can be really hard. And there are nights that I'm just drinking a lot of wine to try and get through it. But once I have that outline, I can follow it. It's like just a highway. And I start writing, and they're usually about 90,000 words each book. And, I have friends who are really successful writers who are amazingly gifted. And when they write a book, they write 150,000 words and then they pare it down. And I just couldn't imagine doing it. And so everything stays focused on the book. I don't journal. And I just try to I keep myself really focused on what that story needs to be. Although I hear journaling is fantastic for some people, because it kind of gets your brain revved up and ready to go. For me, that's Wordle. So
Now you mentioned outlines. Do you do outlines so that you're kind of planning it, or are you just kind of okay, not in your head?
I do outlines, but every so often it veers and something has to change, and you get a sense, okay, I need to go with that because I need to kind of follow that pathway. So it's not exactly nailed down. In fact, there was one point in one book where I was writing a love scene
Mhm.
and the characters started fighting with each other. And it felt like watching your parents fight because they weren't supposed to be doing that. But I went along with it. And in fact, that was right for that moment and for that scene. So I was glad I did it.
Mhm. And because you have the journalism, is that where the historical fiction kind of came to you that you thought, well, I have to go digging. I can't possibly just write a book and make it easy. I have to uncover a lot of things and research.
I have to say people who write books that are, about modern times and relationships, I envy them because I can't imagine it. For me, I need that framework. I need to go and do 3 or 4 months of intense, intense research in order to find the story.
Mhm.
And I think that because as a journalist, that's what you do. You go out, you don't make things up. You go out and find people and interview them and write a story that you feel is as close to the truth as you can do. And so to just sit there and have two imaginary people do things to me is I just can't imagine doing it. I'm in awe of people who can. And so what I do is I go out and I interview people who are experts in, say, they're all focused on buildings. So the Dakota, or Grand Central Terminal. And here in New York, it's amazing because you can find an expert on anything. And, if someone's written a book, I'll reach out and say, hey, do you mind if I talk to you on the phone for 20 minutes, or can I buy you a coffee? And that's where you find the gold, because these are people who know these buildings inside and out. And so, I was talking to one, he's a professor at an NYU, and we were having coffee at the Morgan, and I was asking him about Grand Central Terminal, and he mentioned, there was an art school there, and I had no idea. And it's this kind of unknown secret that John Singer Sargent, the painter, co-founded an art school in Grand Central in the mid 1920s. It was there for 20 years. It had 800 students a year. It was up on the very top level on the east side, and no one had heard of it. And the minute I hear that, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I think, okay, this is the story, and this is what I have to follow. And so by doing research, I go down a lot of rabbit holes, but usually something just tweaks my interest enough, and I know that's where it's going to go.
It is because I always thought it was Grand Central Station. And then in reading the book, they talked about no, station implies things are going to go through. Terminal is the end. And now I
Exactly.
always remember that.
Yeah, it's stuck in my head too. I'll never get that wrong again. Yeah.
So is that often what happens though, where you're just, like you said, you have the conversation, you don't necessarily have an idea in mind, and then you do the research. You start researching, and then something kind of sticks with you and kind of makes you go, ooh, that would be a story.
Yeah, I know if something surprises me, it will surprise the reader. And
Mhm.
so, for example, looking at the New York Public Library, and when I first thought of that, I thought, it's a library, it's full of books, it's kind of stagnant. What can I do with that? And then I learned that when they built it in 1911, they created a 7-room apartment deep inside for the superintendent and his family to live in. And
Mhm.
they lived in the library. And the superintendent really was like the mayor of a small city running this huge building with a lot of infrastructure and a lot of employees. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, what was it like to be the wife of the superintendent? And maybe that's my way in. And then I found these articles in the New York Times that were talking about his retirement after 30 years. And it talked about how he raised his 3 children in the library with his wife. His daughter was born in the New York Public Library, and that the kids used to play baseball using books as bases until they got caught. And the son would raise pigeons on the roof. And it was just so full of this family in a library that I thought, okay, I'll create an imaginary family, but it will be based on these real people.
And Sheila's asked, because you have started to include Parkinson's, are you inspired to write characters that have Parkinson's?
Yeah, the first, it's interesting because you do explore things in your creative life that are happening to you personally. I think it's hard not to do that. And the first time I did it was for Amazon asked me to write a short story as part of a collection. And I wrote a short story called A Wild Rose, and you can find it on Amazon. And it's about a classical pianist who's about to play a big concert at Carnegie Hall, and her fingers start spasming. And she has to figure out what's going on. And that was a direct, link to what I was feeling and what I was going through, just a way to explore it. And then when the latest book came out, which is called The Spectacular, it's set at Radio City Music Hall. And of course, it's about dance and dancers. And I interviewed a number of dancers and Rockettes, former Rockettes for it, who danced there in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And it was incredible because they all talked about how it was this seminal moment in their life to dance on that stage when, at a time when women were supposed to be teachers or nurses, they were financially independent, dancing on that stage. And I remember asking one, what's your favorite memory? And she said it was walking down the middle of Fifth Avenue at midnight, arm in arm with her fellow Rockettes and singing at the top of their lungs. And I just love that, like that sense of freedom and independence. And then I thought, okay, for a dancer, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because that's what you have to do as an author. You create these characters, and then you put obstacles in their way of what their goal is. And because the last thing you want to read is a story about a happy family that gets happier. That's not as much fun. And so I thought, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen to a dancer? And of course, losing control of your movement. was the answer. And so it's lightly peppered in that book. I didn't want to make it the focus. The focus is really this young woman and her way of kind of pulling away from her family and being independent at a time when, again, women weren't. And but there are a couple people with Parkinson's in the book, and if you have it, you will sense that probably pretty early on. And then it kind of gets revealed. And part of it takes place in the 50s when having Parkinson's was so different. And I wanted to capture that in a way to show how far we've come. Um, and so, it can be, it was hard to write certain scenes, were tough to write, but I really wanted to do it in a way to draw people into what it feels like to have Parkinson's. And so readers could do that. And then in the author's note explain, that I had a diagnosis, and here's, places to find resources, so that there's kind of backup at the end there as well. But it was hard to do, but I'm really glad I did it. And I think it added certain dimensions to the book that otherwise would not have been there.
It was, and it was just also very interesting that her fiance was kind of like, some people might be like, "Ooh, I'm dating a rockette," and he was, it really did make you realize like what women went through at one point, where it was basically like you either lived with your parents or you got married and lived with your husband, and these were your choices.
Yeah, and to be dancing on that stage wearing a skimpy costume. I mean, these days, if your daughter grows up to be a rockette, it's,
Yeah.
fantastic. And you'd share it with the world. But back then,
Mhm.
that many fathers did not approve.
Mhm. And do ideas or thoughts come during the night? And if so, do you get up to jot them down?
It's fun. I live with a writer. He writes some thrillers and suspense, and he does. He will get up, and I'll hear a scribble. He'll write in the dark. But what I find, and I've always found, is that when I'm in movement, that's when good ideas tend to come. When I'm on the subway or on the bus or driving, there's something about doing something subconsciously at the same time that you're running a plot through your head. That's what pulls out the good ideas. If I do have them as I'm falling asleep, I find that they stick. If they're good, they'll stick. So I tend to not panic, and grab a pen. I feel like, if they're worthy, I will wake up and remember them, and I usually do. And then I'm really excited to sit down and write and try and incorporate them.
Obviously, as an author has reached the success you have, you do have to do book tours and such. Has the Parkinson's impacted that? You have a tour coming up because you're going to have a new book that I do want to talk about. How are you going to make plans? Like you had kind of mentioned, off time and things like that you normally never had to think about that now you really have to think about.
Yeah, and that's going to be really interesting because the tour, I can't tell you how stressful it is. They send you to at least one state a day, sometimes two. And so you're getting there, you're getting from the airport to the bookstore, you're meeting new people constantly. You're having to perform and to, engage and pull the crowd in. And some of these are luncheons to 250 people, and then you're off to the next one, and you're getting to the hotel late and waking up at 5 o'clock to catch the next flight. It's insane. And we have a really good one lined up. I'm very excited about it. That'll be in early January, and it's about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And after that, there's a lot of travel after that, but it's not as intense. And it'll be very interesting because I'm definitely having off time. And for me, stability, a steady sleep schedule, exercise, eating well, um, less stress, that works well for me, in terms of keeping the symptoms at bay. And this is the exact opposite of that. And so we'll see how it goes. I've always been very open about having it. I wrote an essay for Good Morning America, I think a year into having it, in order to, spread the word and let people know, yes, this is what Parkinson's looks like, um, and to share that. So I'm not worried about, people seeing my arm shake or that kind of thing, but it will be very interesting. What's funny is for the book that's coming up, it's called The Stolen Queen. I have a copy of it here. It'll come out in January, but it's set at the Met Museum, as you can see there. And part of it is set in Egypt. And so that involved a trip to Egypt to do research two Aprils ago. And I was really worried about that with the jet lag. And, it was with a tour, and you would take a boat up the Nile. It was a lot of going to Cairo. It was a lot involved in it. And what happened was I got there and my PD symptoms disappeared. And I realized it was because as a tour group, you don't have to decide anything other than what buffet item you'll be eating that morning. And so, you're told, okay, meet in the lobby this time. All right, we're catching the bus here. We're taking this plane. We're flying here. Now you're doing this. So there were no decisions needed. And I really felt better than I had in a long time. And so I realized that really what works best for me is constant luxury travel. But I don't think insurance will cover it. But it was really surprising. I was really kind of shocked by that. So we'll see. The tour will be interesting, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
But is it because, like, when you were in Egypt, you didn't have to perform in a way? Because I thought, well, technically the tour is a lot of travel, but one way it's sort of like you're what everyone's coming to see versus you're there to see other things.
Yes, yes. It was nice to, just listen to a tour guide talk the entire time. I thought that was great. But what's interesting is when I do book talks, I love them. I mean, I was an actress, so there's part of me that loves just staying inside and researching all day, the introvert. And the extrovert also loves getting in front of people and meeting people and talking books, which is my favorite thing in the world to do. And so when I do go to a book event, I I wonder, I'd love to do an experiment and see. I feel like it creates dopamine, that you're kind of having people come up and say, I love your books. And people will confide in me. My dad has Parkinson's, or, my mother died of Parkinson's, or I have Parkinson's. I don't tell anyone. And so it's this real gift of meeting people who are like-minded and love books and want to talk. And it gives me a kind of a nice little dopamine boost, I think. And then of course you leave and you're just exhausted and can't speak for a few hours because you're overtaxed. But it's a wonderful thing to do, and I just love reaching readers. But we'll see.
Somebody's invited you to the Tucson Festival of Books in mid-March. You could get a couple of signings done in one place.
I have been there twice, and I love the Tucson Festival of Books. It's fantastic. Yeah, I would love to go at any point. I'd love to go back because I love Tucson, and that's a great festival. It really is. If anyone's around there, I highly recommend it.
And then there's a question about have you ever done book TV on C-SPAN?
No, I have not, but I like that idea. That sounds great.
And have you ever had your thought about having your books recorded? Someone said that I read large print books, but lately I've been having problems with my eyes. So if we can have your books recorded, has that ever been
Yeah.
discussed?
Yeah, every book is. It comes out in large print for sure. And then every book has an audiobook. And it's so interesting because when I first started in 2016, not many people listened to audiobooks, and hardcovers or paperbacks were really the main book. And then ebooks started drifting into it. And now audiobooks make a huge chunk of people who buy books. And to me, it absolutely counts. That counts as a book. You're taking a story in, whether it's reading or listening. And so they get these great narrators to do that. People have asked me, would you ever narrate your book? And I say absolutely not, because A, it takes so much stamina, and B, I would want to start editing it. And they don't like you to change it after it's done. But they get these great narrators who are really terrific. And I love hearing them after they're done. And yeah, I think that's a great way to listen to a book. Highly recommend it.
Since you did bring it up, could you give us a little bit more about the Stolen Queen? Oh,
Yeah.
it's good because it doesn't come out till next year. So, and I'm
Yes, it comes
impatient.
out January 7th, and it was really fun to write. I wanted to kind of branch out, and so it's set at the Metropolitan Museum in 1978, and that's when Deanna Vreeland was the chair of the Met Gala, which is the party of the year that everyone knows now as Anna Wintour's reign.
Mhm.
Um, and right around then, the King Tut exhibit was about to open, which was going to be a huge blockbuster. So in the story, there's this very serious, enigmatic curator in the Egyptian arts collection named Charlotte, and she's 60 years old, and she has been researching this pharaoh who's kind of gotten a bad rap, um, and she has this kind of tragic past that no one quite knows what happened to her, but she's never returned to Egypt. And also in the book is a 19-year-old overeager assistant to Deanna Vreeland named Annie. And the two of them, who are very different, have to team up to try and track down a lost artifact, an artifact that's been stolen. And that takes them back to Egypt, where again Charlotte swore she'd never go. And it's about what our cultural heritage is, what should happen to things that are stolen. Should they go back to their home of origin or not? It raises those questions. It's about mothers and daughters and secrets and deadly curses, and really about kind of reestablishing women in their contributions that they've made to history. And so women are on the forefront and not just the male archaeologists. I like to say it's a mix of glamour and mummies, or if you had like Thelma and Louise meets Indiana Jones.
Although I will say it's interesting because women, I find when I do read their story, are often left out of history. So it's always interesting.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting to find, when I'm doing the research of finding these women. For example, in the Magnolia Palace, which is set at the Frick collection, there is a character in it called Lillian, and she's based on a real life artist's model from the early 1900s called Audrey Munson. And she was like the supermodel of the 1910s here in New York City. She posed for statues that are all over New York today. There's 3 of her at Columbus Circle. She's in front of the Plaza Hotel. She's everywhere. And I started researching her life, and it turned out that she's in fact above the doorway to the Frick collection, which is a beautiful art museum here in New York where the book is set. And her life was incredible. She was very successful, and then she got caught in this scandal where her landlord killed his wife very violently. And as the police were investigating, they found this black and white photo of Audrey Munson in a bathing suit from an ad that she'd done. And they said, oh, it must be a love triangle. And they started hounding her. And so she and her mother fled the city, and she just didn't do well. She tried to get into silent films. It didn't work. And she eventually tried to die by suicide by drinking mercury.
Mhm.
And then finally, she was put in an asylum where she died in 1996 at the age of 104.
Mhm.
And then she was buried in an unmarked grave. And you hear about all the sculptors who have made these images of her. You know their names, but no one knew Audrey Munson's.
Mhm.
And I just thought, this is someone who needs to be talked about. And so I loosely based my character Lillian on her. And in order to kind of bring her back to life, and then in the author's note, again, make it very clear what's made up, what's not, and give resources to readers who want to learn more about the real woman.
Mhm. And I have a question. There is a thought that Parkinson's can sometimes make you more creative. Have you noticed this that like since having Parkinson's, do you feel more creative or more?
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. It's funny writing a book. It really does require you to live in two worlds at once, like I was saying, where you're constantly thinking about the book, and writing a book is so painful sometimes, where you're trying to keep this a huge story in your head so things are consistent, so you're not having someone have hazel eyes one minute and then blue the next. So the characters are consistent, and there's no big holes where you read it and think, well, of course that would never happen. And so I think it's really good in terms of the Parkinson's, in terms of keeping those synapses firing and the brain plasticity plastic, like keeping everything kind of, you know, so that by the end of the day, my head hurts. To me, that's a good day. And I just cannot think any more about the book. I just want to go eat and relax and watch really stupid TV. Um, but I do think there's something about it. Torrance, I know who's here, is a photographer, and we were talking about how there's something about doing something creative, and you don't have to do it professionally. Even if you're writing songs or relearning how to play the piano, something like that, I think is so helpful for us as Parkinson's patients.
I actually did do a discussion earlier with Torrance York, so I'm going to put that in the chat in a second.
Oh, good.
She
Yes.
discussed her
Yeah.
book
Speaks
Semaphore.
beautifully about photography and Parkinson's.
Mhm. Um, I do have to ask though, also, do you have a favorite book that you've written? Keeping in mind they're probably like your children, but they're not your children, so you can have a favorite. Do you have one or?
It's usually whichever one I'm working on at the moment, because that's where all your love is going to. It's so interesting because in the publishing world, you write a manuscript and then it goes to my agent and then I rework it and then it goes to my editor and I rework it more. And finally it goes to the copy editor and the proofreader. And then it kind of gets into the pipeline to be published. And that takes about 6 to 8 months for the publisher to get the sales team up to so that everybody's working together as sales marketing. And I don't have a huge part of that. That's where they take it and run with it. And so it's usually been about 6 to 8 months um, after I've finished the book that the book tour starts. And so I kind of have to remember, who are the characters and what's going on. But it's really wonderful because at that point it's like meeting old friends again. And I find I look at it and it has a different levels to it that I hadn't realized when I was writing it. So it's really wonderful to have that step away. But really, it's whatever book I'm working on at the moment tends to be the one that I'm loving. And each one is so different. They're all set in buildings here in New York City. They all have a sense of mystery, but they're all in very different eras with very different characters. And that's nice because if you like one, you'll probably like the others.
I do love them all. We've had several people saying.
Thank you.
Um, we have a question. You did talk about you were diagnosed back in 2020, but kind of your first symptom was the tremor, kind of
Yeah.
in your hand.
Yeah, which I know is unusual. I hadn't lost my sense of smell at that point. And I didn't have digestive issues either. It was really just that tremor. It was kind of a strange one. And so for a while, they thought maybe it might be, they put me on beta blockers to see if it was essential tremor. But it didn't respond to that. And I remember I would be doing, because we were all in lockdown, and I would be doing book events. At that book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, um, was a Good Morning America book club pick, which was really exciting and just a wonderful way to meet new readers and access new readers. But I was doing a lot of Zooms, and what was by that time my arm was shaking kind of like a chicken wing, but I could get the camera up high enough that no one could see. So I was just kind of like, okay, here goes the chicken. And kind of going with it. And it was in a way being in the cocoon, I guess, of COVID and lockdown was good because I didn't have to deal with it in public. No one was going anywhere. There were no book tours. And so I could kind of quietly assess what was going on in my body and figure it out. And then once book tours started, that's when I went on Cinemet, knowing that I needed to kind of see if I could keep the flapping to a minimum.
The flapping. It's good you keep that sense of humor about it because that's important.
Oh yeah.
What else are you going to do? So, I mean, obviously you're writing, which is a little bit more sedentary, but can you tell us a little bit about your workout routine or like what does your day normally look like?
Yeah, I was really impressed by the idea that exercise is one of the one things that can slow the progression. And I took that pretty seriously. I'd always, jogged a couple miles slowly a couple times a week. It was almost like I was going backwards, but I felt like, okay, I'm jogging. Um, and then I really decided to ramp that up after the diagnosis, thinking, I had done a lot of health journalism when I was a freelancer. And so I knew how to access studies and just it just seems so clear. And my doctor said, yeah, if I had to make a choice between medicine or exercise, I would choose exercise. And then I saw people like Jimmy Choi, who of course is an Instagram hero. And he's had it for 21 years. He did not have DBS surgery, and he works out like a fiend and is strong and doing really, really well. So I thought I'll never be Jimmy Choi. um, but what I try to do is I try to swim or do Peloton or walk at least 5 times 30 minutes a week. So there's a heavy aerobic part of it. And then I'll do boxing or strength training or stretching a couple times a week. And the stretching, it's like 10 minutes twice a week. Well, I feel like that's just enough to kind of remember what it's like to stand upright and, keep my head back and that kind of thing, and just remind my body as to where things should be in line. And, I find I crave it now. If I've been traveling and I haven't been able to exercise, I really miss it. Cause I think there's like that dopamine hit that comes from it. And it doesn't come right away, especially if you haven't been exercising. I was just seeing there's an article in the New York Times about it. It takes 3 to 4 weeks to get that after workout high. But once you get that, I find I crave it. And I think that's what's helped for the past 4 years keep the symptoms to a minimum so that most people meeting me would not know that I have Parkinson's.
We have one question. Someone's asking, do you write on computer, by hand? Do you dictate?
Yeah, I write on a computer, and as my meds wear off, my fingers definitely, I make more mistakes. I type pretty fast. And definitely if I'm stressed or if there's, kind of the hour 4 to 5
Mhm.
before I'm about to take my next pill, it gets a little wiggly. But I do it on the computer, and I use a program called Scrivener, which I highly recommend if anyone's out there is writing something that's research intense, because it's a wonderful program that gives you access to all of the things that you've researched with a click. So you can be writing your manuscript and with one click see the dress that you expect the character to be wearing so you can describe it, or an article about a stolen artifact that I need to reread in order to remember what's going on. And so that's what I tend to do. It was interesting, about a month ago, I decided, okay, for my gut biome, I'm going to drink kefir with every dose because that way I'll get, kefir, which is very good for you apparently in your system. But I was taking it with my pill without thinking that kefir is serious protein. And that day, I remember I drove up just north of the city, and my leg was definitely shaking more than it normally does. And then, I took my next pill, and nothing got better. And by about 4 o'clock that day, I was trying to write something in the margins of a manuscript, and I could not write a coherent word. It was so aggravating. And I was trying to make myself, I was just getting so frustrated. And then I realized it must be the protein is just leaching away all the good effects of the pill.
Mhm.
And I was fine once I stopped doing that, but it was quite a lesson as to what I would be like if I was off the meds, and just how impactful they are.
And that's the fermented food or drink made from milk, kefir.
Yes, yes, KEFIR. And again, it's really good for your gut, but don't take it when you're taking your pill. Lesson learned.
And you did mention, so you do participate in a support group.
Yeah, yeah. It's a wonderful group that kind of came out of Shakers Anonymous, which is a wonderful support group based in Connecticut that's both online and in person. And that's really what I found first. A woman named Lynn Hagerbrandt runs it, and she's incredible and just a real inspiration. And we kind of ended up doing an offshoot of just women from that, because we thought, we have special issues that we want to discuss amongst ourselves. And it started with, I'd say, around 10 people.
Mhm.
And now there's a good couple dozen, I'd say. Not everybody does it every night. And I haven't been able to join in as frequently as I would have liked to just because of work. But yeah, and it's wonderful. It really is, because it's women from all around the country, great senses of humor. If someone's having a bad day, we can kind of buck each other up,
Mhm.
and it's fun. It makes you laugh, and you kind of see the absurdity of some of what we're dealing with, and I think that helps to deal with it.
And I'm gonna put in the chat. Somebody asked about Scrivener.
Oh yeah.
That in the chat.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's really intense when you first do the tutorial. You think there's no way. I use probably 5% of what it can do, And that's all I need. So don't be intimidated by Scrivener. It's really quite wonderful.
And then I love this question. What New York City locations do you have in mind for your next book? Because even though you just put one out, we're already like, where's the next one?
Yeah, yeah. The next one is actually going to be set at a place no one has heard of. And I'd be curious if anyone here has. It's called the Morris Jumel Mansion. And it's here in New York City. It's on 161st Street, and it's the oldest house in New York City. It's this huge mansion on this, it takes up an entire block with the grounds and the garden and the mansion. Um, and it was incredible. It was George Washington headquartered there for 33 days during the Revolutionary War. The woman who lived there was this woman, Eliza Jumel, who was the daughter of a prostitute who eventually became one of the richest women in New York City, or even in America in the 1800s. And, she apparently killed her husband. And, there's all this drama around Eliza Jumel. And apparently she still haunts the mansion. She was married to Aaron Burr for a year until she divorced him because he was spending too much of her money. And it's great. Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote part of Hamilton, the musical, in the mansion because he did it in Aaron Burr's bedroom in order to kind of channel him.
Oh,
And so it's just fun. I was surprised. I tend to run my ideas by my editor and my agent because they like to kind of get a say. And usually they want something that's kind of glamorous and well known, because people gravitate to that. And I mentioned the mansion. I kind of gave its history, and they both said, absolutely, you should do it. And it'll be out in 2026, which will be our 250th anniversary as a country,
mhm.
and which makes sense for that building because it is so associated with early America. So we'll see. It's kind of a jumble right now, but I'm figuring it out bit by bit.
Well, I'm excited for it. Now, I'm sure there are some people on this call who would be curious as to what advice might you give to people who want to write, who are writers, but even just if they just enjoy it as a hobby. Because again, I like people to keep busy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the Gotham Writers Workshop is a great place if you want to just start thinking about doing a memoir or a short story, or a novel fiction. It's a wonderful place just to dip your toe in, and that's what I did when I first thought about possibly writing fiction. And then it's to really read widely so you get a sense of what's out there. And then once you get an idea that you just can't shake, go for it because there's no wrong way to do it. And it's really satisfying and very fulfilling. And yeah, and the thing is, you know, once you've written your first draft from beginning to end, I highly recommend doing that. Like you may about 75% of the way through writing any book, including everyone that I've ever done, I hit the wall. And I just think this is so awful. I'm so bored of it. Who will possibly read this? And I remember hearing Laura Linney, the actress, talk about when she's kind of training for a show. She said the same thing, right before Tech Week, which is when you start putting it on stage. She hits a wall and she thinks this is awful. And that was when she realized if she pushes through that, that's where the meat of the role is. That's where the heart of the book is. If I push through that 75% wall, you come out the other end and you have a finished product that you can play with. And then you can start, massaging it into place and fixing sentences and rearranging paragraphs. But you need that clay to sculpt from. So I'd say just get through it, get through that first draft, no matter how painful.
And you kind of mentioned it, but could you go a little bit more into how did you transition from nonfiction to fiction?
Yeah, it was really, like I said, kind of finding a story that I couldn't shake. And I really didn't know much about the fiction world. I didn't know how it worked, and it's very different from nonfiction. And it was about finding the right team, really. So finding the right agent who I knew understood what I was trying to do. And then she, put the book out, and we got with Dutton, which is the publishing company I've been with ever since. And they're wonderful, and just found an editor who, was incredible at helping shape that first story and the ones after. Um, and it's a real team effort. And what's interesting is most of the team are women. It's, marketing, publicity, and they're incredible at launching a book because it is absolutely a team effort. And, I could yell out the window that I have a book, but no one would care. They get it out to Amazon and to independent booksellers who then read it and then, do word of mouth to try and pass it on to the readers who they think might enjoy it. And I'm just indebted to that community. It's a great community of other authors and booksellers, bloggers. It's really a fun crew to be with, I have to say. And a lot of the women authors I know are kind of women over 40 who had another career. And so we're also grateful
Mhm.
that this is what we do now after being lawyers or, actors. That it's a real joy to hang out with them.
Um, Someone asked, would you mind sharing any comments from your movement disorder specialist on your diagnosis? Because did you have any sort of family history or anything? Or
Yeah, that's a really good question. My uncle had multisystem atrophy, or they think he did. He's in England. He's passed away, but that is the closest. He was also a dairy farmer, so of course there's a real association with environmental reasons for it. I don't have the genes for PD, so it's really hard to know where it came from, and that's the thing. I feel like a number of people I know who have PD don't tell anyone because they don't want people to know. They don't want to seem old. They don't want to lose their job, which is absolutely valid. But for me, I thought, I want to find answers to why I have this. And, I have a brother and we had the same environment growing up and he does not have it. And what's interesting is he got his appendix out. And there are studies that show that people without appendixes tend to not get it, which is very odd. A very, a small study, but it's kind of fascinating. I still have my appendix and I have PD. But for me, I thought, I could try and hide this, but it reminded me of kind of breast cancer 30 years ago, right? Where you did not talk about it. In the masterpiece, one of my books set at Grand Central, it's set in the 70s and the woman is dealing with having gotten a mastectomy and not being able to tell anyone. And then, of course, the Breast Cancer Alliance came together and, they realized that there's power in numbers. And that's how you get the numbers down. And they did. The breast cancer is much less a disaster than it was in the 70s. I mean, I know a number of people who've had it, and luckily everyone's doing well, but that wouldn't have been like that in the 70s without the research and the resources that were pulled together from just the sheer numbers of people standing up and making their voices heard. And so I really thought, I want to be one of those people who's yelling it from out my window. That yeah, I have PD. This is what it looks like. It's the fastest, growing neurological disease in America. The fact that we haven't banned pesticides like paraquat is just, when countries have either suspended or banned it in Europe, China, Russia, the fact that we still use it and it's known to cause PD, to me, that is something that we need to get the word out. It's wonderful that we have the National Plan to End Parkinson's has been passed. I think that's a great step forward, but there's so much work to do. And so I feel like the more of us kind of stand up and say, yep, I have it. This is what it looks like. And let's get together and fix it, the better chance we have of doing that.
so it sounds like it never once crossed your mind to kind of just say, let me just keep this quiet. I don't want anyone to know. It sounds like you were kind of like, okay, this happened and I need to kind of, I don't want to say embrace it per se, but definitely use your platform to.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Especially because, when I do book talks and someone comes up to me and I can see they're about to cry because they want to talk about their loved one who had Parkinson's. And just to have them have a place to do that is really, really important, whether it's on the signing line or in an airport or whatever. I am thrilled to be associated with it so that we can connect with each other in a way and mourn the loss of people who've passed away and then, go on to take care of each other.
Oh, I like this. Although I will say, I always maintain that I know no one wants Parkinson's, but the best people get it. And so I'm like, but I get to work with them.
I like that. That's a good one.
And I like this one. Do you recall mentors from childhood who influenced your life as a writer?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, there was a teacher in eighth grade, Mrs. Gall, Gaul,
Mhm.
and this was in New Jersey, so she was Mrs. Gould. And I never knew how to say it because my parents said it differently. I never fit in. But she kind of took me under her wing and she pushed me to do things. I was really, really, really shy. And we moved around enough that I just had withdrawn into this scared little kid. And she made me like do the announcements at the end of the day. So I'd have to go to the principal's office and do through the thing. And I was just terrified, like cold sweat. But she pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I really owe so much to her. And in fact, we recently connected on Facebook, which was wonderful because I could actually, thank her. And then another teacher, Mr. Morone in high school was the Shakespeare and the theater teacher, and I got very involved in theater, and that's where I found my people. It was that's where I realized, oh, I'm a drama geek. Okay, and had a great time there. And whenever I do a talk in New Jersey, he comes, which is really nice to be able to see him and again thank him again. So yeah, there's absolutely mentors all along the way. It's
But
a
did
good
you really
question.
write as a child, or was this something that kind of, when you took this personality test, you're like, oh, writer or policeman? So I guess I'll start writing.
Totally. Yeah. No, I never wrote. I just couldn't imagine it. Like it was beyond me, the idea that you could write a book, 90,000, 100,000 words. How do you start? How do you finish? And it was only when I started very chopping it up piece by piece. Okay, here's how you figure out the characters. Here's how you figure out the plot. Once I figured that out in a way that worked for me, I was good to go. But yeah, no, I loved reading books. Like I loved The Secret Garden. I loved the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. There were so many. And then once I got to know Shakespeare, I really fell in love with that. And there's so many great writers today, like Kate Quinn and Marie Benedict, who are writing amazing historical fiction, that it's really kind of a pleasure to be part of that crew.
Is it difficult though? Because a lot of people say you should write what you know. And obviously you're like, I'm going back in time. I'm not going to do anything that.
Yeah, well, luckily, if there's not enough people around to tell me I'm wrong, I won't make mistakes. So, I mean, when they're talking about the 1880s, you got a little leeway. Um, but yeah, I love doing that scaffolding of here's what happened, here's this building, here's these ghosts of generations past who lived there. And what was it like? What was it like to be one of the first residents in the Dakota, right, in 1884? And what if I made a character who's the kind of housekeeper who's in charge of getting everybody moved in? What would happen to her? What could happen to her? And it's just asking those questions of what if this happened and what if that happened? That yeah, I love that, and I love just then kind of using a fictional characters who are draped over that real solid scaffolding. And that to me is a fun book to write and a fun book to read.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time. I do encourage everyone to save their chat. We put a lot of links in there, including Scrivener, Kiefer, previous programs, including our Your Brain on Art, and also what we did with Torrance York about photography. Thank you so much for being here today. I really, really am so grateful. As always, we have a tradition here in PMD Alliance, our wave of gratitude. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks,
Great.
everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank
Enjoy.
you. And thank you for having me. This has been an absolute delight. It's wonderful to see everybody.
Bye, everyone.